This is GARIS, Masculist, MGTOW, flyers. That is 2-3 page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW. Written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 129, entitled MGTOW/Masculism's Formidable Weapon. Description. This flyer aims to persuade MGTOWs that it is not a waste of time to try to persuade the gender politicians to menfair the gender laws, because MGTOW/Masculists have a formidable weapon that I usually call the nuclear weapon, namely the power to wipe out whole populations by continuing to refuse paternity. The MGTOW/Masculists should push this threat politically onto society, to women, to men, to journalists, to feminists, to the gender politicians, until men get gender justice. Now the flyer itself. MGTOW/Masculism's formidable weapon. I think the opinion of many of MGTOW's leading theorists that it's a waste of time trying to persuade the gender politicians to menfair the gender laws is misguided, in fact just plain wrong. I say this because the MGTOWs/Masculists have a formidable weapon that they can use against the gender politicians, and that is, quote, "If you gender politicians don't menfair the gender laws, we MGTOW/Masculists will, in capitals, wipe out the whole population by continuing our rejection of paternity. We are no small movement. We are already 70% of young men under 35 in the US and Japan, and our numbers grow exponentially." This is a terrifyingly powerful weapon that inevitably will cause the gender politicians and politicians in general to quake in their boots. Men have such power. MGTOWs/Masculists are so fed up with the treatment of men in modern society that we have decided to go on strike. I enjoy watching history videos on YouTube. I'm struck by the future historical enormity of MGTOW/Masculist ideas and the impact they will have on society as their full consequences play out over the coming few decades. I consider the invention of the contraceptive pill to be the greatest social revolution to have occurred in history, that is over the past few thousand years, since the invention of writing. Because of it, women were able to choose reliably the number of kids they wanted, namely 0, 1, 2 in most cases, which freed them up to have a career span of some 40 plus years, which in turn allows men to be freed up from being manslaves to women. This is all revolutionary. This process is still underway. Most men are still manslaves to women, but young men are waking up in droves and refuse to work for women, expecting women to be FIPs, that's financially independent persons, and punishing traditional women, whom the Masculists label fluffies, based on the word fluff, with connotations of being light, not serious, not adult, not responsible, not career competent, not fit, by refusing to have anything to do with them, thus forcing fluffies to rot on the shelf to extinction. The primary goal of the Masculists, who are a lot more political than the apolitical, passive MGTOWs, is to wipe out fluffies by forcing them to become FIPs. A fluffy cannot be a fluffy unless she manages to get her financial claws into a manslave who is gullible enough, that is, he has not had his men's consciousness raised, to work for her. But the supply of such men is rapidly drying up. Already 70% of young men in the US and Japan refuse to be manslaves, and probably within a decade it will be over 90%. So women will be forced to be FIPs, or they won't eat. Men are on strike and refuse to work for women. Those women who do expect men to work for them are being shamed by MGTOWs, and especially by Masculists, who label such women immoral, parasitic, manslaving vermin to be wiped out. And if the gender politicians don't menfair the gender laws within a few decades, that is precisely what will happen. Because not only will women be wiped out, so will men. The whole population will be wiped out if men continue to refuse to have kids, because fatherhood has been made so toxic to men by a fluffy feminist dominated society and by the gender politicians who don't give a shit about men's welfare. So, we're talking about a massive groundswell of men getting angry getting politically conscious and becoming more aware of the immense power that men have to change the gender status quo that is so genocentric, financially massacring one married father in 4 in the fluffy feminist-dominated divorce courts, not giving men the right to reject paternity the way women can do to maternity, etc. All this screams of gender injustice, and men are getting fed up with it. The masculists say to the MGTOWs that men do have the power to force the gender politicians to menfair the gender laws and to change the genocentric attitudes of modern society. We just need to tell the public, the gender politicians, the journalists, women, men, feminists, that men are the superior sex and therefore society cannot survive without men. Men have the power to wipe out the whole population if the gender laws are not made men fair. We men create everything, we invent everything, we build everything. If suddenly all the females were to die, men would survive quite readily for a century, because men know how to run a modern society, because we men invented it and built it. If suddenly all the males were to die, the female population would crash back to the Stone Age within 6 months, because women are incapable of running a society. In other words, they couldn't run the machines and everything would grind to a halt and women would starve. We men are nearly all FIPs, so we have the power to force women to be FIPs too. Otherwise they go manless and rot on the shelf to extinction. We have the power to stand up to fluffy feminist PC, political correctness, in parentheses, is cyanide fairy bullshit. Because most scientists are males, who can be extremely condescending and dismissive of feminist PC bullshit, smashing their egos with masculist venom and facts. We have the power to make the journalists really sit up and take notice by telling them the same story that MGTOW/masculists now need to start telling the gender politicians, that is, menfair the gender laws, or we MGTOW/masculists, that is, men, will wipe out the whole population. This population wipeout argument is obviously political and extremely powerful, and one that MGTOWs use in practice, but not yet in theory. This flyer aims to persuade MGTOWs that they should really start using this argument to persuade society, the media, women, feminists, the gender politicians, because it is not a waste of time. It is so scary that all these groups will be forced to listen until men get the society they need, one that is gender fair, a society that appreciates strongly all that men give and create for society. So I hope to hear less talk from MGTOWs about how hopeless it is to try to change the minds of the gender politicians on genocentrism and the gender injustice against men, quote, because more women vote than men, end quote. Men have the power to wipe out whole populations, so nothing is more powerful than that. So men have the last say. Since the rejection of paternity is already well underway in the US and Japan and similar countries, the fuse is already lit for a mass awakening to the man strike. Soon, maybe within a few years, given that the first mass media documentaries on MGTOW/masculism have already started appearing, there will be an explosion of consciousness that men are angry and will force society to be gender just, or pay a horrible, in fact, the most horrible of prices, namely its total annihilation. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. YouTube channel name De Garis, Masculist, MGTOW, Flyers. Ciao.